Welcome to the Canadian Beef Cattle Podcast, presented by the Beef Cattle Research Council, the most popular content from beefresearch.ca, available on the go. Before we get into today's episode, a quick message from the BCRC.
Working with your veterinarian can help make the daunting task of understanding potential disease risks and developing a vaccination protocol easier and effective. Vaccinating beef cattle is critical to safeguarding your herd and optimizing production and profit. Find a collection of practical vaccination resources and interactive calculators on beefresearch.ca or by clicking the link in the show notes.
This episode features the BCRC Science Director, Dr. Reynold Bergen.
Hi there, I'm Reynold. This Research on the Record article originally appeared in the June 2024 issue of Canadian Cattleman magazine. It's been reposted on the beefresearch.ca site with the publisher's permission. Today I'm going to talk about comparing tame forages under grazing. So I mentioned this last time, since 2013, Canada has not required any testing or merit assessments before registering new forage varieties. Now, that's made it easier for breeders to get new varieties on the market, and it's given producers more choice, but it's made it harder for producers to know whether those new varieties are any better than or even as good as old or current varieties. Now, regional variety trials have helped to fill this information gap, but those trials only focus on yield and sometimes forage quality. They don't usually involve grazing. And forage performance under grazing is rarely examined, but it's really, really important because a mechanical plot harvester doesn't selectively graze, and it doesn't trample plants, and it doesn't deposit manure the way cattle do. So grazing trials are important, but they take a long time, and they're really costly, but they do provide very important information. Recently published results of a forage variety grazing trial that they ran at the University of Saskatchewan's Livestock and Forage Centre of Excellence. Now, this project was funded by Saskatchewan's Ag Development Fund, and the published paper is linked in the online version of this article if you want to read it for yourself. But here's what they did. This team seeded pure stands of a tap-rooted alfalfa variety called Cronus and two creeping-rooted alfalfa varieties. One of them was called 3006 and the other one was called Foothold. They also seeded AC Mountain View Sandfoin, AC Armada Meadow Brome Grass, and AC Killarney Orchard Grass. In addition to those 6 monoculture plots, they also seeded each of the two-way grass legume mixtures. So that adds up to 14 sets of plots, 6 of the monoculture plots plus 8 of the two-way mixes. Each of those plots was 70 feet wide by 400 feet long, and all of those plots were seeded side by side. And then that whole area was fenced into a pasture. So that was repeated 3 times. So there were 3 of these pastures, each of them containing all 14 of the different kinds of forage plots and mixtures. Then over the next 3 years, they collected samples for forage yield and quality during the grazing season. And they also measured something called etiolated growth in 2020 and 2021. And what etiolated growth does is it gives you an estimate of how much energy the plant has stored in the crown and the roots to power regrowth in the next spring. Now, they also monitored the amount of time that cattle spent grazing each of those plots. And here's what they learned. Well, in terms of weather, total precipitation for May through September in Saskatoon usually averages about 8 inches or 200 millimeters. These plots were seeded in 2018 during a drought, which saw about half of the normal rainfall. Then the first 2 grazing years saw normal rainfall before the drought returned with half of normal rainfall in 2021, so about 4 inches then. So these plots were established and grazed under pretty challenging conditions. So not surprisingly, the forage yield reflected the rainfall. They had the highest yields in year 2. Overall, 3 years, the 3006 alfalfa was the most productive legume. It produced 2.3 metric tons per hectare. Mountain View Sandfoin was the least productive legume at 1.5 metric tons per hectare. And the other two alfalfas, the Cronus and the Foothold, were intermediate at about 2 metric tons per hectare. Meadow brome grass yields were double that of orchard grass. So meadow brome grass was 1.5 tons and orchard grass averaged 0.7 tons per hectare. And then the yields of the two-way mixtures ranged from 0.9 to 1.5 tons per hectare and were not any different from each other. There's a big range there, but they overlap so much that they weren't statistically different. And that's because the brome grass produced way more yield than the legume did in its mixtures, whereas the legumes helped make up for the lower yielding orchard grass in those mixtures. Alfalfa had higher protein and energy, or TDN, and had less ADF and NDF fiber than the Sandfoin did. The legumes had higher protein and energy and less fiber than the grasses, and orchard grass actually had less fiber than brome grass. Grazing preference, so the amount of time the cattle spent on the different kinds of plots, the grazing preference was highest for the straight alfalfa plots, while the straight orchard grass was the least preferred. The other varieties and mixtures were intermediate, but generally the alfalfa meadow brome crosses were preferred, and mixtures that either involved Sandfoin or orchard grass were less preferred. That's kind of interesting, actually, because both Sandfoin and orchard grass had reasonable nutritional quality. So maybe cows are more like people than we think. Just because they prefer it doesn't mean it's necessarily what they need from a nutritional perspective. The Mountain View Sandfoin might have been a bit less attractive to the animals because it tended to be slightly more mature when the grazing started. Now, the effects of variety or mixture on cattle performance couldn't be measured, right? Because each of the paddocks contained all of the mixtures and all of the cattle could graze whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted. So you couldn't figure out what average daily gain was for the different forages that were in there. But it's important to note there was no bloat ever observed for any of these forages or mixtures, even though the cattle always had access to straight alfalfa. Now, this etiolated growth that I was mentioning earlier, that was also influenced by growing conditions. Again, those are the energy stores for spring regrowth. Now, all the forages stored similar amounts of plant energy in 2020, which was the wet year. But in the 2021 drought, energy stores were down by 60% in alfalfa, down by 80% in Sandfoin, down by 77% in meadow brome grass, and down by 86% in orchard grass. And that's pretty important because that tells you, how likely they are to survive the winter and come back in spring. So what does this tell you? Well, after all, this was only a 1-3-year project at one site in one soil zone. But it does illustrate a couple of really important points. The first is that even though alfalfa yields really well and has a really good nutritional profile, the risk of bloat scares a lot of producers from using it at all. But if you mix alfalfa with grass, you really, really reduce the bloat risk. So using a mixed alfalfa grass stand is a great way to get the quality, yield, and palatability benefits of alfalfa while reducing the bloat risk. In contrast, Sandfoin is a bloat-safe legume. It won't cause bloat at all, but Mountain View Sandfoin might not perform as well as alfalfa under drought conditions. Killarney orchard grass had a high nutritional value, but it wasn't overly drought tolerant or palatable. And finally, that etiolated growth result, that's simply a sad reminder that a severe drought last season means that forages will have a lower energy store this spring. That means less regrowth and slower regrowth early in the growing season. And that means some tough decisions about balancing the herd's need for feed with optimal turnout dates and stocking rates for the sake of the pasture's longevity. So the bottom line is that just because a new variety has been registered doesn't automatically mean that it's better. Good yields in a plot harvest trial doesn't mean it's going to stand up to grazing.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. You can find all relevant links and information at beefresearch.ca or in the show notes. The Beef Cattle Research Council is funded by the Canadian Beef Cattle Checkoff and strives for excellence in the production of Canadian beef, cattle, and forage through research, innovation, and extension. Tune in every Tuesday as the Canadian Beef Cattle Podcast delivers straightforward insights, expert information, and a wealth of practical knowledge for Canadian beef producers. Subscribe now.